Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in for the first time to us on West Coast Patriot. Today, we have a very special guest that we're going to talk to. We're going to be covering a lot of the things that have been happening in Venezuela over the last 40 years, I'd say. And we're going to talk about Maduro's capture and a few other things. I'm going to pass it off to my other host, Mark Johnson, to introduce our guest.
Okay, hi. This is a real pleasure for me. I'm not only introducing someone who's an expert on this topic, I'm also introducing a friend, someone who I've come from seeing her working in court to have a great deal of respect for. And Mirta Carolina Fuguet Alba, that's her full name. And how did I do?
You did great.
All right.
Better than most.
Okay. Good. I will be walking on air all day. Okay. You emigrated at age 29 to America from Venezuela.
That is correct.
Okay. Now, how, Mirta, is that good? Can I call you that?
That's Mirta.
Mirta, how would you describe yourself? Say, everybody nowadays seems to label everything. Are you Venezuelan? Are you American? Are you a Latina? How would you describe yourself?
I am a Venezuelan American. I have dual citizenship.
Okay. And loyalty as well. That's what I have seen by talking to you.
My loyalties lie with the United States. I took an oath when I became a citizen, and I am holding up that oath. And I have a special heart for Venezuela. Of course, I was born and raised there.
Okay, hey, that sounds like a good entree into what I wanted to ask you. Let's talk about your childhood there. And, I hate it. My dad always said you never ask a woman her age, but I kind of have to on this one because I need to put you what years. I think in the 70s and 80s you lived in Venezuela.
That is correct. I don't mind the question. I am 56. I was born in 1969, at the end of 1969. So I lived in Venezuela through the 70s, 80s, all the way through the end of the 90s.
How would you describe your childhood?
In Venezuela, during my childhood, it was so prosperous. It was amazing. It was such a prosperous country that we became the quintessential melting pot. We had immigrants from many countries coming and succeeding. It was almost a shot to the floor to succeed in Venezuela because the economy was doing so well.
Oil, was that a big portion of the economy?
Yes, absolutely. Venezuela depended more than 90% on oil income.
Now, I also, in my reading, and please, I will correct me if I'm wrong, there was a good partnership between American oil companies, and the Venezuelan government back in those days.
That is correct. There was this agreement where America provided an infrastructure that Venezuela did not have the means or the technology to have, an infrastructure for oil extraction to refine the oil, and also contracts signed with American oil companies. And in exchange for providing that infrastructure and technology and also staff support, the United States would get good deals in exchange, oil deals,
Okay.
very favorable deals. And it worked really well for both countries.
Yeah, if you, along the Gulf of Mexico, there's refineries still there that were set up for the type of oil that Venezuela has. I know, do you know much about that? Can you, because I know Venezuela has got, it's apparently a heavier type of oil.
Yeah, it's a very heavy crude oil.
It requires a certain type of refinery for that?
Correct. And it is the largest oil reserve in the world.
Wow.
Crude oil.
Crude oil reserve. Okay. So growing up, it sounds like it was a prosperous time for the country. In fact, I read about Venezuela back then, and it was kind of a model for all like other countries in Latin America. It was like the finest country in Latin America.
And it was one of the strongest economies in the entire continent.
How would you describe the government? I mean, what was the economic system? And by that, I'm talking about you have obviously capitalism, and then you have socialism and things. How would you describe the
Capitalism.
Okay. Uh, Now, it sounds like something must have changed there.
Yes, it was a process. It was like the perfect storm with very horrid results. In the 90s, the oil prices plummeted. It was a combined result of overproduction after the Gulf War. And there were several factors. Also, the OPEC didn't know how to handle all this overproduction. And that, of course, in a country like Venezuela, where more than 90% of the economy depended on oil, when the oil prices plummet that way, that affected. There was a banking crisis also in the 90s. And that brought upon a lot of social turmoil. People, inflation went up, the currency exchange, the price of the dollar just increased incredibly, which affected imports and exports, and that all reflected in the price of food and goods.
And do you have a specific memory or the first time maybe you saw in Venezuela where things started to change? Because how old were you at that time?
I was in my mid-20s.
Mid-20s? Okay.
Yes, I around 1996, during the banking crisis, there were banks closing down, and many of us were quite nervous because, the funds, many people lost their money.
Yeah.
Some banks, some of the funds were not backed by the central bank. Some people lost money. Some of us, most of us, including me, the banks only said, okay, you have this much, we're going to give you back 60%. And we would get out of those cashier's checks and go to a bank that had not closed down. That was a very scary period. I remember at the time, my dad, rest in peace, he decided to invest a very large part of his savings, and he bought dollars, because that, the dollar is solid. So, and the Bolivar, the national currency, was going down. And the bad luck that he had is that precisely when he was doing the transaction, these banks crashed and he ended up in limbo, and he never got his Bolivares back, or he never got the dollars that he bought.
Well, because it sounded like a pretty good plan, buy dollars.
Correct. And many people were doing it. The thing is that the people that did it at the same time when my dad did it, that money disappeared. It was gone.
And how did those people rebuild? Because, losing everything, how are they going to rebuild their wealth?
There was no rebuilding at the time because the economy was crashing. So it was extremely hard to rebuild. My dad was never able to rebuild. He was too old. He was old and sick at the time. So he was not able to rebuild. This was in the beginning of the 90s. He passed away in 1995. Okay. So this was just a couple of years before he passed.
When did Hugo Chavez show up on the picture?
He first showed up when he staged a coup against Carlos Andrés Pérez, then president of Venezuela, in 1992, an attempted assassination and coup.
Okay. And then I would think that it was kind of fertile ground for somebody to bring socialism in. I'm just wondering what you think about that, because you have a country there, the economy's collapsed, your main form of income, oil, is floundering, and I would think it would be ripe for somebody to come in and make a lot of promises he's never going to keep, but they'd sound good. So I'm just wondering, maybe you can take us through the end of the rest of the 90s.
Well, he definitely made a lot of promises. And one of the promises that he made is that he was never going to bring socialism into the country. There was an interview, and it's somewhere in there. It can be found if you Google deep enough, and you will find him kind of evading the question about whether he was a socialist, but he also said that he was not going to bring that type of government to Venezuela. He was not bringing socialism. When Chavez failed that coup, he was actually imprisoned.
Okay.
And but there was this group of powerful people, the Cisneros, and the Cisneros group was the owners of Telcel, one of the two main telecommunication companies in Venezuela. And the Cisneros, they are Cubans, and they have ties to Fidel Castro. behind the scenes, the Cisneros started working because they wanted to take control of the country. They wanted more power. And Castro had always wanted to take control of Venezuela because of the riches and the strategic closeness to the United States and whatnot. And they started working behind the scenes to support Chavez. Rafael Caldera, which was president in the mid-90s, pardoned Chavez.
Say that again. That
Rafael Caldera.
he fired Chavez.
No, he pardoned Chavez.
Pardon Chavez. Sorry,
He pardoned Hugo Chavez, and the Cisneros, with the mentorship of Fidel Castro, prepared Chavez, and they did a campaign to clean his image, and they just launched him as a candidate for the presidency, and then by the end of the 90s. Venezuela, because of the financial crisis, there was also a political crisis. It branched out into 12, I don't know if it was 12 or more, political parties for that 1998 election, with all these candidates. And the vote was going to be really dissolved. And days before the election, some of these parties started supporting the main two candidates, which were Hugo Chavez and Enrique Salas Romer.
And do you think that was all premeditated? Was that all part of their plan to get him elected, or did it just happen to end up that way?
I think it ended up happening that way. I don't know what happened behind the scenes, if the Cisneros or whomever spoke to these candidates. I guess these candidates realized that they didn't have any chance. And there is something that is very Latin American, which is once you get into power and you're somebody's friend or compadre, you will get some sort of position where you're going to benefit. So everybody wanted like the little slice of the cake there. So they lined up with either Chavez or Enrique Salas Romer. So Chavez won the election. I mean, he had the votes. It was not a landslide, but he had the votes. And that's it. He won that election. After he won the election, he showed his true colors.
Well, I was going to say, because would you call this a turning point in Venezuela when Chavez won that election? Bingo, the downhill.
Absolutely, it was downhill, and it went fast.
But it sounds like he actually legitimately had the votes.
He did.
Okay.
But at the same time, he was also lying the entire time of his campaign.
Yes, absolutely. He was lying.
Just look at the guy. I tell you, he doesn't look like any guy I'd trust whenever I've seen him. But I guess he managed to convince 51% of the Venezuelans back in 1999.
They cleaned up they prepared him really well. They cleaned up his image really well. If you see the 1992 Chavez that staged the coup and attempted assassination of the president, and then you compare him just a few years later, 5 years later, campaigning, it's completely two different people.
I do find it interesting that the guy who cleaned him up was Fidel Castro. He's not exactly some fashion plate himself, but...
And when you say he prepared the coup, if I'm saying that right, what is that?
A coup. He tried to assassinate and overthrow the government in Venezuela, assassinate the president and overthrow the government.
Yes.
And install a military regime.
Okay, so Chavez is in power. How did he show his true colors?
Within months, he did a couple of things. He modified the Constitution.
You mean like ex parte or unilaterally? He just modified the Constitution?
It was such a messy process in which he basically dissolved Congress. He started acting as a dictator almost right away. One of the first things he did to accomplish this is he obtained the support of the military in two ways. One, he started doing promotions and ended up with this square structure instead of the pyramid structure, which is supposed to be, lower ranks here, and the higher you go, the less people you have. It's a square, basically. It's like a rectangle where you have a lot of higher rank here, and you buy them out in two ways. It's basically, if you're not with me, you're against me. If they were with him, he rewarded them very handsomely with contracts and whatnot. And then whomever opposed him, he was jailing. He was just jailing or punishing them in some way. So once he has the military, and it was very widely known that as soon as Chavez won, In military bases in Venezuela, the weekends were just endless orgies.
Oh,
For military staff, he would bring hundreds of boxes of scotch, cocaine, strippers, DJs, food, and every single weekend there were these orgies at all military bases, and then he doubled up their salary. So he won their loyalties like this. Once you have all that military strength, he also basically dissolved Congress, and then his new Congress approved this constitution that provided for unlimited 6-year terms.
So he gets. Sorry, I'm still back on these orgies and scotch and doubling your salary, and I guess it was that easy. He got the loyalty.
100%.
And it probably had to be hard for the people working under him because all those people are citizens. They have families, and for them to be getting promoted and getting paid more and taking care of their families, it's kind of a, correct me if I'm wrong, but a hard battle to not take.
Oh, they went for it immediately.
Yeah. They kind of had to, though, right?
I grew up around military. I knew a few, and I couldn't believe it how they sold out immediately.
Well, I mean, I'm not defending selling out, but I will say if strippers, orgies, liquor, more pay, on this side, prison. I mean,
exactly.
And the problem is you either have to leave the country or you got to get with the program, probably, because I would imagine you'd end up dead or imprisoned if you opposed him. So you'd really have to leave if you.
And he did.
Like you left right around that time.
Yeah, I was not leaving because of the regime. It was for personal reasons. I was basically engaged to be married here.
Yeah.
But I was going to say that even Chavez, he from the beginning, he showed how harsh he could be and how far he was willing to go. Mm-hmm. There was a group of officers in Maracaibo who opposed. They did not sell out. And he famously locked them in a cell with mattresses doused with gasoline and burned them alive and made it known. This is what happens when you oppose me.
Yeah.
And he became a semi-god.
Yeah, and this might be a good time, as we were talking about earlier, for people that don't know what the jails are like in Venezuela, for them to make that choice is, be imprisoned or take your other option and get promoted. Can you tell us what the option of going to jail actually looks like there? I
personally visited a couple of prisons in Venezuela when I was in law school there with my criminal procedure class, and it was just infrahuman. It's really hard to fathom that humans could live in those conditions where the showers had like this thick of a slime, mm-hmm. and the bathrooms, the toilets didn't work, so they would be just splashing in their own feces that would be there for months and months. When visiting one of the prisons, we walked in front of an area and I started heaving because of the putrid and smell that was coming out of there. It was putrid and it smelled like carcasses and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And turns out that was the kitchen. And that day they were having a special meal because we were visiting. They gave them decent food, which was a bowl of pasty rice with chopped up hot dogs, and the hot dogs were green. They were so decomposed. But that was the good food. And so wow. It's just, yeah. So that's what they were facing. Those were the options, like Mark said.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, sometimes I think it's easy to sit here and say, no, damn it, I'd be one of those guys who'd be right up there in Chavez's face. And they also, I would imagine, they use a lot of intimidation against families as well. Sometimes it's easy to say, no, I'm going to stand strong, but what about your kids?
Correct, and they still do. They still do that.
Okay, so now at some point, the influence of America seriously waned, and it looks like it was other countries took over, and the Americans were out in terms of the oil. Can you talk about that? How did that happen?
Well, Chavez, in his dictator style, decided unilaterally to cancel all contracts with all American oil companies, in breach of all those contracts, and he on national television, live television, he expropriated all that American property, all that infrastructure, all that old infrastructure. He just expropriated it.
But I think the term they always use, we've nationalized in other words, they become part of
they become part of the state
Venezuelan government.
Of the Venezuelan government. And he just basically stole all that, correct, and took over all these industries and, all these installations, all these
Apparently
facilities.
Chevron has stayed down there. I heard that. I've read that. The Chevron's still there, has been there.
I don't believe so, but
Okay.
don't quote me on it. I don't know.
Well, what was the advantage? Just pretend, let's put yourself in Chavez's head. What was the advantage of doing that? Why not continue these profitable mutual agreements? That
stemmed from his ingrained hatred of the United States. From the beginning, he started just talking about the Yankee Empire, and he would call Americans Yankees and whatnot. And also, he transferred control of all that to his allies, which were Russia, Iran, China, and Cuba. So that was the advantage for him, is that having Russia, China, Iran, and Cuba, having deals with them, allowed him to use those funds from the oil to acquire more power, to enrich himself and his family and friends and compadres and whatnot, and to inject more money into the military, to keep the military personnel happy so that he would be bulletproof against any coup.
Well, when you tell me that lineup, if you had just added North Korea in there, it would have been a clean sweep with all these rogue regimes. But, okay, the average Venezuelan, let me contrast. The average Venezuelan, the guy who, runs a shop, good, honest person, versus people who were like Chavez's select friends and that. What was the difference? What happened in those years, and what was the difference in the lifestyles?
Well, little by little, the private industry, any privately owned shop, whether it was a mom and pop shop or a large company, started disappearing. Because that's one of the things. He declared himself a socialist after he was elected, and that's one of the things about socialism. It completely obliterates private property and the private industry. So the private industry in Venezuela all but disappeared. It was reduced dramatically.
What do you think of socialism? What's your opinion? You think it works anywhere?
It does not work. Socialism is the equal distribution of poverty and misery. That's what socialism is. It just doesn't work. It's very emotional. It appeals to the emotion and these feelings of everybody. There should be justice and equality, but it is completely unrealistic. It's inapplicable. It just doesn't work.
Well, I don't know if a lot of people will use the term socialism, but they really don't know exactly what it means. It's basically an economic system where the government controls all the means of production. So there's not these little shops you go to and maybe you get a better buy, and here and in a place in America, you've got the government controls the stuff. You can imagine how that would go.
Correct. And the government is run by human beings, and we humans are very flawed. And as soon as you give someone that amount of...
Well, now, hold on there, Mirta. No, I'm joking, obviously. Yeah. Yes, I'm quite flawed.
The moment you give people that amount of power, and access to that amount of wealth, it is extremely hard not to be corrupted, not to become corrupted. And that's why socialism doesn't work, because it takes all this from the people, and then the government has all this power, and it becomes a dictatorship. It does.
And you've seen it. You've got family there. You've got people who've lived through this horror.
Correct. Family and friends that are still there. The ones who have not fled. In the largest exodus in this hemisphere in history, you have 1/3 of the population of a country fleeing the country because they were starving. Okay. So
give me, I know it was about 11, 12 million Venezuelans actually left the country because it was so bad.
It was about 9 million, 10 million Venezuelans who fled the country.
And where would they go? Where was the main place for them to go?
Wherever they could. Whomever could get a hold of a plane ticket would leave that way. Very soon after Chavez was in power, they started controlling passports. So people were trapped in Venezuela. So most of these people who fled, they fled on foot. And they walked to Brazil. They walked to the rest of South America. They walked from Venezuela across Central America, Mexico, to try to make it to the United States. There is this famous jungle that is called Darien.
Oh, that's right at Panama, right?
And there are horror stories of people trying to cross Darien on foot. Now, imagine the level of desperation that you have to risk your life and your family and your children, because the Darien doesn't look as bad as staying in Venezuela.
Wow. You said 9 million?
About 9 million.
People said, I can do better walking to America.
Through a jungle where there is a very high probability that if I don't get killed by the wildlife, there will be hordes of thugs and gangs that most likely will rape me and my family or kill me and my family. And that was preferable to stay and starve or be taken prisoner and be tortured.
Yeah, basically be killed.
Mm-hmm.
Just, this is a little tiny bit off, but what's gun ownership like? And, we have a Second Amendment here. And in the Second Amendment, basically, at its foundation, is designed to be a protection against tyranny by arming the citizens. And I just wonder, in Venezuela, does the average person own a firearm?
Oh, no, that's one of the first things also that Chavez did, is no right to own a gun.
That is typical across the world for those types.
For these regimes, exactly.
And did they take people's guns as well?
Yeah, yes. I mean, whomever had a registered gun, they had to relinquish it. If you were found with a gun, then it was, you would go to jail and whatnot. Yes.
Now, you've got a lot of relatives in the country right now.
Still, yes.
Do you keep in touch with them, talk to them?
Yes, many of them, yes.
Okay. And I'll get to what they think now shortly, but did you keep in touch with them, say, during the years like 2000, 2010, 2020? Always. So you were like kind of your antenna on the ground there, yes. right in. Okay. And did they report to you unhappiness, and did they tell you how bad things were there?
That is the thing. They could never do it, and they cannot still do it in writing.
That's right. Yeah. But you mean even an email? They'd be afraid to do it in
No, nothing in writing. There is, they are in fear, very rightfully so, because the colectivos, which are the paramilitary forces of the regime, and they have been around since Chavez's time. There are these are thugs, and they are there in the thousands, and they are armed with military-grade weapons, and they do the regime's dirty work, and they go. And randomly, they will grab somebody's cell phone and they demand to unlock. If the person refuses to unlock it, they get beat up right there, or they get dragged and never seen again until they unlock the phone. And these colectivos, they go through people's phones, through their apps, emails, texting apps, everything. And if they find anything that could be construed as being against the regime or not favorable to the regime, anything can happen to them. They either get beat up right there, or they get killed right there and then, or they get dragged and detained. And some of them never even make it to any prisons. Many of them just disappear, never to be heard of again.
Okay, tell me, how did Maduro end up in power?
He was appointed by Chavez. When Chavez was diagnosed with cancer, and he knew he was campaigning to be reelected, but he knew he was not going to make it. He was extremely sick. He directed his followers, and also, not only his followers amongst the people who still supported him, but also his government, his staff. He directed them to elect Maduro. He said, Nicolás Maduro is going to be the next president. And then the thing is that by then, around 2000, I believe it was 2006, Chavez had already done an institutional capture of the National Elections Council, the CNE. And he appointed Tibisay Lucena as head of the National Elections Council. And they had Smartmatic as the elections software, which even though Smartmatic is privately owned, the Tibisay Lucena, the head of the CNE, actually owned the source code. So they manipulated elections from the get-go.
Okay, so
And
Maduro's was manipulated. That's
so
pretty
yes, Maduro was
established.
never legitimately elected president. It was through Smartmatic, and it was just one after another. It was just like that. All these elections, and not only the national election, it was also regional elections, governors, mayors. We're talking about the whole governmental structure. It was run through Smartmatic.
So it was fixed.
Yes.
And this isn't just you talking. This is like the United Nations and respected organizations that have looked into the election.
Correct. Now, there is an organization which caused a lot of damage, which is the Carter Organization. He was completely lined up with Chavez.
Wait, the Carter
Yeah,
organization?
that's Jimmy Carter. In fact, Jimmy Carter, my mom saw him there in Venezuela.
But he's such a nice man. That's what everybody says. Now you're telling me he caused a lot of problems.
Well, but he actually went in person, and his organization went as observers because there was so much uproar about electoral fraud that they went as observers, and they arrived at the conclusion that no, there's no fraud. So they validated the fraud, and that caused a lot of damage because all our claims with the OAS, the Organization of American States, the UN, we Venezuelans there in the country were clamoring that the elections were being stolen and whatnot. All those claims were invalidated because of this Carter Organization arrived at the conclusion that they observed and they didn't see any fraud.
Well, because I've done a lot of research on this, and there doesn't seem to be any question that Gonzalez, who was running against Maduro,
Edmundo González Urrutia.
Gonzalez got about 70% of the vote.
Correct.
They did by
No doubt.
going to pulling all the information from the various voting places.
Correct.
And so that guy Maduro's never been legitimate.
No, never. And, a side note here, another thing that Venezuelans were always saying is Maduro is not Venezuelan, so he could not be the legitimate president. Maduro was born in Colombia. He's Colombian. And now that he is in New York and, the U.S. government has dug deep there, they found his birth certificate from Colombia.
Oh, great. That's good. I didn't, when we were speaking earlier, I didn't get the feeling you were too impressed with his brain power either.
Not at all. Extremely uneducated man. He never finished school. But his main qualification was being a socialist communist, and he was Chavez's right-hand man.
Okay, so how bad did things get during the Maduro years? Because a couple times somebody chastised me that said that's not true, because one time I had said on social media that he basically trashed the country. Was that a fair thing I said? Or maybe probably wasn't the most eloquent words, but...
No, but you were right. But he was not the one who trashed the country. He continued the trashing that Chavez began.
Yeah, but you got people starving on the streets, and that big fat guy is sitting there. I'm told he enjoyed lobster regularly.
Correct. And he, he famously would post photos having dinner with Celia Flores, his wife, with this Salt Bay guy, the one that adds the salt to food.
Oh,
like
yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Wait, who's that?
The Salt Bay.
Salt Bay. This is a very famous chef, and it's extremely expensive. We're talking about thousands of dollars for dinner. So and they would post about it while people are starving on the streets.
Okay. So you think this is like the predictable outcome of a socialist regime?
Of course, it doesn't work, and this is exactly the outcome that all these other countries that followed suit in the beginning of the 2000s and followed suit following the socialist agenda, and all these socialist people started winning elections. Actually, they were getting elected. Correa in Ecuador, Evo Morales in Bolivia, Lula in Brazil, the Kirchners in Argentina. And all those models failed. All these countries completely crashed. Their economies crashed. And many of these leaders right now are sought by Lula from Brazil. He's in prison. Cristina Kirchner from Argentina, she's in prison. Maduro, now he's in prison. Evo Morales, he's a fugitive. Correa is a fugitive after they completely trashed their country because the socialist model just doesn't
that
work.
Dude who brings out the chainsaw, is he Argentina? You know, the guy, he's like been elected. He's kind of like, they say he's like.
Oh, he's really feisty. That's Milei.
Milei, yeah. Where's the Argentina?
Yeah, Argentina.
Argentina. What do you think of him?
I like Milei.
Yeah, I like him too.
He has no filter.
And he's got no, the guy's a courageous son of a bitch. I mean,
Absolutely.
But, okay, so did you ever notice a difference in the behavior of the Venezuelan regime depending on who was in power in America, Democrats versus Republicans? Did you ever see any difference in how they acted down there?
I did. They received oxygen with Obama in power. They received the most oxygen with Biden because Biden really did, not only did he, see, Obama didn't boost them, but he didn't do anything to do damage control either. Biden actually boosted the Venezuelan regime a lot. The only two times that I have seen the Venezuelan regime crack has been in the two Trump administrations. Back in 2017, there was a referendum, and we had the U.S. government, the Venezuelans had the U.S. government support.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a referendum, and it was there. The U.S. government became involved in negotiations to just phase out that regime. And then now, with the capture of Maduro, now effective changes are taking place.
Well, I mean, Biden did put a $25 million bounty, but the one thing I will say, and one of the things I really want to talk about, is your thoughts about people who say we should not have taken Maduro out. But Biden actually put a $25 million bounty on him. I'm just curious, nobody complained about that, like, how are you going to go get him? But what were people thinking we were going to do? Go invite the guy to come out to lunch or something like that, and then we'd snatch him away? I mean, I don't understand what they thought was going to happen. The way to get that guy out of power, you had to do what Trump did. That's my opinion.
Correct. And you know, one thing that I would like to clarify, in regards to the bounty, it was originally Trump who did 15 million. Biden increased it to 25. Then Trump, in his second administration, increased it to 50 million. But what you have here is not necessarily, and it's important to understand this, Trump didn't go take somebody out of power. That is not the main thing that happened here. You have someone who is an international fugitive with an indictment here out of the New York federal courts, who, along with his wife, was one of the heads of the Cartel de los Soles, and who had an international Interpol alert and a bounty. And that's what exactly happened, was the capture of an international fugitive. It was a surgical capture. Boom. It was not a government takeover. It was a capture of an international fugitive.
Yeah, he got in and got out very quick.
And out. Zero civilian casualties. Zero civilian casualties. It was not a war on Venezuela. It was not an attack on Venezuela. It was not an act of war. It was the capture of an international fugitive.
So I don't think I can say quite easily you were really much in agreement with capturing that guy and getting him out of there.
Absolutely. And so are most Venezuelans.
Yes. Well, what would you say about, I heard somebody actually said to me that about 25 poor Cubans were killed going in. What I'm sitting here wondering what the hell 25 poor Cubans were doing in the palace.
Well, it was 32,
32.
and that's one of the many things about this regime. They deny things, and then they lie so much. They were Maduro's closest guard. He did not trust Venezuelans to guard him, so he had Cuban agents guarding him where he was. It was 32 of them that were taken out in that action. They shot at American forces, and American forces responded in kind.
Okay. What do you have to say? Well, first, okay, you're really happy. You're glad to see that guy out of there. I'll tell you one of my fears, and it's based on I did a year in Baghdad with the Army, and we were working on government rebuilding and that. And the U.S. tends to not have a good track record in government, like building governments and that. I can tell you over there, that was just disorganized and nobody was in charge. So I got afraid when Trump says, he does tend to talk real quick. Oh, yeah, we're going to be running Venezuela. Well, no, I don't think we can handle running Venezuela. That's a pretty big country. I hear it's about the size of Texas, which is like 25 million people or something. You'd have to send a lot. What do you think of that? Is he that scares me a little bit when he says stuff like that?
And I understand that, Trump can say some outrageous things. He has no filter. And he says some things that, make you go, oh, what was that about? It is not exactly running Venezuela, because Venezuela has a president now, which is Delcy Rodriguez, but they are watching very closely. And yes, they are issuing very strong suggestions and instructions, and Delcy Rodriguez is cooperating with the United States.
Okay, why? Okay, let me give you some examples. I think you think she was the right choice in there. I hear she's brutal. The lady's.
She's evil. She's evil.
Not any wilting flower, this lady.
Oh no, she's a necessary evil right now. Okay. Sadly, she's a necessary evil right now. The alternative to having still the regime in place as it is, with Delcy heading it, and the current goal of a transition, the alternative to that is an intervention Iraq, and we don't want Iraq, and we don't want another Iraq.
No, we don't.
Not at all.
No. Okay, what about that Nobel Peace Prize winner that gave her award to President Trump? Why not? She seems to have a lot of support of a lot of the people. What do you think about her stepping up to the helm?
Correct. She has the popular vote. She has the popular support, but she does not have the support of this entire military structure right now, and she does not have support of these colectivos, the paramilitary forces. So it is completely unrealistic, and Maria Corina Machado understands that, and she supports the current plan, which is a transition where what would she do if they say, okay, Maria Corina Machado is now the president? How is she going to rule a country where the structure, both military and civilian structure in power, hate her?
Yeah, she'll probably end up dead.
She's going to end up dead.
Or fall out of a window accidentally.
In the worst case, and in the best case, she's just going to do what? She will not be able to govern right now. That's why it is important to do a transition.
And are the Venezuelan people relieved with who's in power now, or are they still kind of weary about what's going to happen?
No, they are worried. They are extremely worried because the people in power are still the regime. I mean, Maduro and Cilia Flores are here facing charges and whatnot, but the whole regime is still in place. But it's not the same as it was before Maduro was surgically removed.
And what's keeping them to follow that? Sorry, what's keeping them to follow the regime and keep it going and not have people step up and take it down?
Keeping them, you're talking about the Venezuelans?
Yes.
Well, you still have the same structure in power that has been assassinating. It's been a massacre and imprisoning people for years. So people are scared. When Maduro was removed, when he was captured, you saw hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans celebrating around the world except in Venezuela. And it is not because they were not happy. It is because they are scared. Because for years upon years upon years, every time a Venezuelan expresses anything against the regime, they get imprisoned, they get killed. Even during the many peaceful protests that were staged, and there's so much footage out there. I mean, don't believe me. Look it up. The footage is there.
Oh, yeah.
Where people would go with flags peacefully. No weapons. Evidently, there are no weapons. The population has been disarmed for over 20 years. These people were just protesting, going on streets, and then they are met with tanks. And the bullets that were shot were not rubber bullets. There are lots of executions on tape.
Hey, let me.
People are scared.
Maduro, I one time quoted a figure, and tell me if I was right, that he was responsible for about murdering 6,000 people. Is that in the ballpark of what that guy? I would think these guys, once you get over the fact that you're willing to do that kind of behavior, it must be easy for these kind of people. So
I wouldn't be surprised. I don't have the, I mean, I don't have the number right now. I have it somewhere, the number of people executed, but I can tell you there are documented 43,000 instances of human rights violations, and they are documented almost 16,000 political prisoners, many of them who were executed in prison.
Well, you've got a strong personality, and it's quite endearingly strong personality, and you for years were working on this end, I think, as
Yes.
opposing the regime.
Correct.
Okay, what type of work? Tell us about that. What'd you do?
At first, the first protest that I participated in was in 2003. And I was just participating in peaceful protests here mostly in LA, in front of the Federal Building on Wilshire Boulevard. We were just, holding posters and just trying to raise awareness. And as the years progressed and the regime got worse, I kept attending these protests.
Okay.
And then at some point around 2016 or so, somebody handed me a megaphone.
Yeah.
And and I became the megaphone lady. And I just started just speaking through that megaphone. And next thing you know, within weeks, I was one of the leaders of the protests here, always permitted, always peaceful, law enforcement always present.
Didn't you have like CNN and people come up and interview you?
At first.
At first.
They were very interested. The protests were really like in 2016, 17, they were really, very frequent all over the country.
Again, all opposing the regime.
All opposing the regime. And in my case, many of these protests were raising awareness about the human crisis and whatnot that was happening in Venezuela about the regime. And one of my goals was to raise awareness for the American people to understand that not only do you have a humanitarian crisis and human rights violations, but you also have a security threat right there, a couple 100 miles from the coast of Florida. A country that is friendly to the enemies of this country. You have a country that is harboring Hezbollah training camps.
I want to ask about that. That pisses me off when I hear that we let that go on for so long. You were probably going to keep going, but now I'm on Hezbollah.
If you let me, I would.
Okay, let me hear about how I read that there were 6 Hezbollah training camps in there. And what do I mean, when I see people that were opposed to us going in there and taking that regime out, what do they have to say? Why were these people there with training? They're focused on America.
Exactly.
It's either us or Israel. It depends on what day of the week.
But you have a regime that is friendly, that is an enemy of the United States, that is outspoken against the empire and the Yankee empire, and that is befriending all these countries that hate the United States, Russia, China, Iran. Well, Chavez was very, very close friend and personal friend of Muammar Gaddafi. He mourned. He actually ordered flags to be half-staff when Gaddafi was finally toppled.
I somehow can't see a Gaddafi having any friends when he was there.
Well, Chavez was
When he was there, he was. There he had birds of a feather flocked together. Okay.
So, yeah. So
So what's Hezbollah doing there? Is that
Training. They have
training camps?
And guess who they are training against?
Well, of course,
The
it's
United
us.
States.
Like I said, it's either
They're
us or
training
Israel.
terrorists.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
training terrorists. Correct.
Well, I tell you a guy, and I love saying this because I know I have, if you look at my social media accounts, they're like half liberal, half conservative, so it always turns into a big brawl. But I can tell you one guy I really like is our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. I think that guy's brilliant, restrained.
He's doing a great job.
Doing a great job. What do you think? Do you agree with me? Go ahead. Feel free to disagree, Mirta.
No, I agree that he's doing a good job. And he has filters and he's very smart.
Well,
and also, this touches him very closely because his parents had to flee Cuba.
Yeah.
So he's the son of people who had to flee a socialist communist regime and people who lived through the horrors that socialism and communism bring to a country. So it touches him very closely. So I believe not only because he is brilliant, he's doing this not only because he's brilliant, but also because his heart is into
he's also
it.
kind of humble, too. When I see him talking, I don't get, Trump sometimes can suffer from
A
the sin of
gigantic
hubris.
ego.
But
Yes.
And he has a lot on his plate. He's doing a lot of communication with a lot of countries, and he's keeping it all under control.
Correct.
And it's just very impressive.
It is.
Because if you're working under Trump, if you're not doing your job, he's gonna
Oh, you're out.
you're getting out of there. So
Mr.
he must be
Mr.
doing his
never
job.
sleep. I mean, I don't think he slips. I mean, some of those texts, I will say, Trump's texts at about 2:30 in the morning. If I didn't know he was not a drinker, I would think he was.
I agree with
Because he does a lot of his most prolific. But what I try to tell people is he wasn't elected to be a pastor of the church.
Correct.
Yeah, and so, I mean, but...
And he's not running another term after this, so he's going to do anything he wants to do.
And I think that one of the issues that we're running into, and we ran into in Latin America and we're running into here, is thinking about our leaders with our emotions, with our gut, with our knee-jerk reaction, with our... we need to elect people who will do the job, whether we like them as a person or not.
I mean, let's take a guy like John F. Kennedy. He was cheating on his wife.
Correct.
I don't care. So what? I mean, I'm seriously, I don't care. What's he doing as the president? And he might not have been the best example, but okay. Let me ask you. What do you respond? How do you respond to this, Mirta? That this was just a big oil grab by the United States. It's all about oil. So, what do you have to say about that?
Okay.
Oh,
Venezuelans are more than happy to go back to the things they were before. If that is the intention of this, so be it. Welcome. Because if the consequence of this oil grab is that Venezuela will get out of this nightmare and be a not only prosperous, but free country again and be out of a dictatorship, then that's fine. And that oil grab, I have to do the quotes because the deal that there was before between Venezuela and the United States was United States was getting cheap oil, correct, but it was working for Venezuela as well because that money was going to the economy and benefiting the people.
Mm-hmm.
So I would also say to these people that are so upset about the oil grab, where were you the last 27 years when Russia, Iran, China, and Cuba were actually stealing Venezuelan oil? Where was the outrage? Where was the concern about Venezuela, about Venezuelan oil? During 27 years, Venezuelans have not benefited from the oil income from this looting that these countries have been doing against Venezuela. All that oil money, it went to the regime and to finance deals with these countries, but it never reflected in the economy. Mm-hmm. How do you explain that in these last 27 years in Venezuela, they have had to devaluate the currency, the Bolivar, so many times, and at one point they had to take out 6 zeros out of it.
Really?
And the currency exchange difference between before Chavez took power and now, the price of the dollar, now you have to add 14 zeros after the number to get $1. So we're talking about what? Trillions, quadrillions bolivares for $1?
Well, I think Italy in the lira took out some zeros and started over at some point. It got so ridiculous, but
And same with Argentina, but we're talking about 14 zeros here. By the time Chavez was in power for just a few years,
yeah,
the same amount of money that my dad spent when he bought me my first car in 1988, that was the cost of an apple.
a pineapple.
Wow.
An apple.
Wow, an apple. Oh, an apple. Not even a pineapple.
No.
My God.
An apple. That was the same amount of money. My dad spent 54,000 bolivares in 1988 to buy my first car, a sedan.
Oh my God.
It was 54,000 bolivares to buy one apple when Chavez was in power in the beginning. Now it's add what? 11 zeros more to that.
How much of I see people who suddenly, my feeling, they couldn't have given a rat's behind about Venezuela 3 months ago. Then the minute we go in there, suddenly it's this moral thing, or we should have had a declaration of war from Congress. Are you kidding me? Can you imagine how many leaks you would have had on that?
Correct.
On anything we did? I'll just say this. And look, I was not, I spent a lot of years in the Army, but I wasn't one of these special ops, heavy duty soldiers. But this operation was about the most magnificent thing I've ever seen in my life. Nobody can do that. I honest to God, was proud of America when I saw we did it.
It was impressive. It was incredibly impressive, super well coordinated.
What do you think about people that it seems like all they're doing is criticizing America? Frankly, I'll tell you my opinion. If Barack Obama was in office and the exact same thing happened, you wouldn't have heard much of a peep.
Well, we didn't hear much of a peep when he dropped, what was it, 26,000 bombs in about 7 countries in the Middle East, Iran, Yemen, Afghanistan, and other countries without congressional approval. So one of the things that bothers me now is the selective outrage.
Yeah, it was okay then, but not now.
It's selective outrage. Why are you outraged about one operation where a couple of, 32 Cubans and a handful of Venezuelan military personnel died, without congressional approval? But where was your outrage when Obama dropped 26,000 bombs and thousands of people died?
Yeah.
Without congressional approval as well. Where was the outrage?
Yeah, this was a very targeted thing. I mean,
Yes.
if you're looking at, if there's such a thing as a humane military operation, this was it.
That was it.
Bombing from way up there is not.
Yeah, I don't think people understand how tactically skilled our military is and can be. I don't think people understand. For them to go and pull that mission off and get him and bring him and his wife back alive is very impressive.
I don't mean to. I liked it.
And they brought them in, and you just touched on a very important point. They brought them in alive.
Alive. Yep.
Unscathed. They were in perfect condition. They were alive. They were brought in to justice.
Yeah.
To face justice.
What are your plans? Let's say Venezuela. I'm guessing you'd like to go back. Would you ever consider living in Venezuela again if things say they're? You're probably going to say no, because I'll just say she's a real kick-ass attorney and gets a lot of great results for people. I used to see, as a judge, I was a Superior Court judge, she would come in and her clients were always extremely well represented, and as you can see how passionate she is. Sometimes she was one of these lawyers I almost didn't want to say no to because I was afraid of her. But what are your plans, say, with Venezuela? Do you think you could live there again?
Well, my children are here, and
Yeah, I
I
get it.
cannot imagine living that far away from them. But visiting, I would like to visit. However, I have not been able to go back to Venezuela. The last time I was there was in 2013. I went to visit my mom, see her, and of course the rest of my family. My brother is there as well. I have relatives there. I went to visit, but in 2014 I became more involved more vocal here against the Venezuelan regime. And I was informed, by the way, by someone who was part of the regime. He passed away now, but he was up there. He was a higher up in the regime, but we remained in contact, and he let me know that I was blacklisted. And the moment I would set foot in Venezuela, just because of speaking up against the regime here, I would be arrested and I would become one of the many political prisoners there. And I have not been able to go back to Venezuela to visit. I had to say goodbye to my mother over the phone.
Yeah, I know that was very painful for you.
It was extremely painful. And at one point, we knew she was going to pass away. She was losing her battle to cancer. And at one point, I was so desperate that I told her I might take my chances. And she begged me not to go. And you know how hard it is to just choose to say goodbye to your mother over the phone?
Yeah.
Out of fear of being arrested.
I'm glad you listened to your mother.
I am glad too, but this is a big heartbreak. And that's part of what I would tell these people that are criticizing the United States so much. And they are saying that we're losing freedoms here. No, you know what loss of freedom is? It is so easy to criticize and complain from freedom, from a good life. People who have been born in the United States don't seem to understand what a good life we have here, how much freedom we have here. And it is so very easy to criticize and complain about something when you have not really lost it. And when people say that we're losing freedoms here, I want to tell them, you know what loss of freedom is? Getting a colectivo, a paramilitary person, having the right to go through your phone and beat you up or kill you or imprison you just because you spoke up against the regime. We have people here burning flags and effigies of the president and cussing him out freely, and nothing happens to all those millions or thousands or however many of them are criticizing the regime. Loss of freedom is risking your life just for expressing an opinion like that. Loss of freedom is not being able to say goodbye to your mother just because you spoke up against the regime thousands of miles away. That is loss of freedom. We have a lot of freedom here. We have an amazing life here.
You don't have to sell me on that. I mean, this is a great place. I don't know what we seem to have a lot of professional complainers nowadays, and it's almost like a matter of pride if you can come up with several bits of oppression that you're suffering right now. So,
well, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I can tell you something. I mean, show me who has ever risked their life either floating on makeshift boats made out of plastic bottles or crossing a jungle to flee into a socialist-run country.
Doesn't happen.
Yeah,
It just
Cuba.
doesn't
Go to Cuba.
Who is risking their life to go into Venezuela or into Cuba? It's the other way around. They're fleeing these regimes.
Okay, right now, let's say you're looking out there and you want to say something to the Venezuelan people.
Something to give them courage, hope.
Yeah. What would you say?
I would say just hold on, trust God, trust the process that is happening right now. Keep the faith. There's finally a light at the end of that very, very dark tunnel that is a 27-year-old long tunnel. Just don't lose hope. There's finally a transition taking place. It's going to take time. And sadly, many of these thugs, including Delcy Rodriguez and Jorge Rodriguez, who knows, maybe even Padrino Lopez, Diosdado Cabello, who knows, some of them might get away with what they have done and they might negotiate their way out. We need to look at the big picture. And the big picture is that if this transition keeps happening the way it has been planned out and the way it already started happening, Venezuela will be free again.
Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the West Coast Patriot. We are very glad to have our guest, Mirta, on today. We had some very good talks. Please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram to watch all of our content. Thank you guys for watching. Again, my name is Cody Garrison.
Mark Johnson, and God bless.